The topic we'll be discussing is poliomyelitis. So the polio is the organism that is causing the disease, and myelo is used when we are talking about the spinal cord, and itis is used for inflammation. So as the name indicates, this virus will be causing the involvement of the spinal cord. So poliovirus is basically an RNA enterovirus, means it has got to do something with the intestines as it replicates in your intestines, and it has got 3 serotypes: 1, 2 and 3. Transmission is mainly by fecal-oral route with some sort of respiratory transmission as well. The virus persists in the throat because it's one of the replicative sites for polio. It persists in the throat for 1 week, but it's excreted in the feces for several weeks to months. Remember, whenever you vaccinate a child with poliovirus, you need to inquire about some sort of immunocompromised host in the family, like cancer patients, AIDS patient, as it can result in basically transmission of the virus from the child to that particular immunocompromised host. Clinical features. Majority of them, like about 90 to 95% of patients, will have asymptomatic infections. They will have the infection in their body, but they will be presenting with no signs and symptoms of poliomyelitis. About 5% of patients will be having non-specific febrile illness, which is also known as abortive polio. And approximately about 1 to 5% of patients will be having CNS involvement. And that CNS involvement can either manifest in the form of paralytic polio, or it can either be non-paralytic polio. So let's understand the pathophysiology. First of all, this is our poliovirus. Sorry for the illustrations actually. When this poliovirus is taken orally, it's going to replicate initially in your throat. And then from the throat, it's going to move downwards to your intestines. Intestines again is one of the replicative sites. If the virus persists in your intestinal tract, the GI tract, the problem it will be causing is abortive poliomyelitis. If the virus gain access to your blood, it causes viremia. And emia is basically used when we are talking about blood. So virus is basically present in the blood. This virus gets into your blood, and then from there, either via the blood, it's going to go to your CNS, and this is the cross section of the spinal cord. When it enters the CNS, the clinical features are of the non-paralytic polio. But when it invades the motor neurons, it causes paralytic poliomyelitis. So, as talked about earlier, asymptomatic infection is present in 90 to 95% of cases. The abortive polio, or the non-specific signs and symptoms, are present when the virus is either present into your GI tract, or it causes the viremia. So then this non-specific symptoms of abortive poliomyelitis are present, which are as follows: malaise, anorexia, nausea, fever, constipation and abdominal pain. And this is present in usually 1 to 5% of the population. The non-paralytic polio is present when the infection enters the CNS, but it has not invaded the motor neurons. When it invades the motor neurons, it will be causing the paralytic poliomyelitis. So when it gets into your CNS, it will be irritating the meninges, and ultimately it will be presenting with clinical features of meningitis like neck stiffness, positive neck, and the Legg-Rudzinski, which are usually the signs which we elicit while checking for signs of meningitis, and fever. Initially, the superficial reflexes, which includes the abdominal and the cremastic reflex, is depressed, and after 8 to 24 hours, the deep tendon reflexes will be depressed, and when they can either be depressed or exaggerated. And this depression or the exaggeration of the deep tendon reflexes usually indicates impending paralysis. So the paralytic poliomyelitis happens when there is basically an invasion of the motor neurons. So the motor neurons are basically supplying a particular group of muscles, and when those neurons are damaged, you'll expect a paralysis of those muscle groups. So in paralytic poliomyelitis, we have the non-specific signs and symptoms, that is fever, anorexia, plus we have a paralysis of the muscle groups, and we also have deeper brain involvement, which manifest as pain, spasticity, hypotonia, or vasomotor changes like hypertension. So you can expect the paralysis to be asymmetric and flaccid, since we have a destruction of the lower motor neurons, and in lower motor neurons we have a flaccid paralysis, in contrast to the upper motor neuron lesions, which manifests itself as spastic paralysis. So the paralysis is usually complete by the time the temperature normalizes. the weakness improves due to collateral sprouting. So what is this phenomena? We have this muscle which is basically supplied by this motor neuron, and this motor neuron gets damaged by the poliovirus. So in the course, with the passage of time, there is an axon nearby, and when this senses that this motor neuron is damaged, it will be sending off its collateral axon, which will re-innervate this muscle. So we have this process of collateral sprouting happening, as a result of which the weakness improves. So this explains why patient's weakness usually improves with the passage of time. The phenomena over here is of collateral sprouting. Paralytic polio. So polio can involve your CNS. It can either be your cortex that presents with encephalitis. Spinal cord is usually affected, so we'll have the problems related to that particular spinal cord region. Either you can have bulbar is for medulla, so it manifests usually with cranial nerve palsies, and if you have the involvement of both the bulbar and the spinal regions, it's known as bulbospinal poliomyelitis. So the spinal cord. Usually the cervical and thoracic spinal cord regions are affected, and we expect the weakness of these regions. The muscle groups of these regions will be paralyzed. So we expect the weakness of muscles of neck, extremities, intercostal or the diaphragmatic muscles. In bulbar forms, usually you have a problem with the glossopharyngeal, the vagus, the hypoglossal nerve. So 9, 10, 11, 12th cranial nerve involvement is usually present. And since this 9, 10th, 11th, 12th is usually supplying your pharynx, oral cavity, pharynx, the tongue, the larynx, so you expect problems like nasal twang to the voice, oropharyngeal dysphagia, that is problems with initiation of swallowing, the regurgitation, the nasal regurgitation of food, dysphonia, the loss of cuff reflex, and this usually accounts for most of the deaths due to polio. The bulbospinal, it has got mixed features of bulbar and spinal forms, and encephalitis will present with altered level of consciousness and irritability. Remember, polio is a pure motor problem. And one more thing, that is the involvement of diaphragmatic and intercostal muscles is important, because when they are involved, it results in respiratory insufficiency, which is usually characterized by tightness, weakness or paralysis of the respiratory muscles, and ultimately you will be having problems with respiration. So the diagnosis of polio is usually clinical. When you perform the lumbar puncture, the proteins might be mild to moderately elevated. The glucose would be normal, because this is a condition that's caused by viral. In case of bacterial meningitis or any organism meningitis which is caused by bacteria, you expect the glucose levels to go down. The lymphocytes, since it's a viral disease, we have the lymphocytes that is abundant. The diagnostic test of choice is usually a stool culture, which is 2 or more stool specimens are taken 24 hours apart, and you can actually detect the virus in your stool. Throat swabs can also detect the virus. As talked about earlier, the virus replicates in the throat, and the virus usually persists in the throat for about 1 week, and in the stool it persists for about 4 to 6 weeks. Prognosis. So the more the paralysis during initial illness, the more severe the disability, because it identifies that the more the motor neurons were damaged. So this predicts that more the paralysis during the initial illness, the more severe will be the disability. And as talked about earlier, 95% of patients are usually asymptomatic. For those who develop the paralytic poliomyelitis, there will be some sort of weakness. The weakness usually persists with some improvement in the first 6 months. As talked about earlier, this is usually due to collateral sprouting, but again, there will be some sort of weakness that will persist in patients who are survivors of polio. A small percentage of patients who recovers from poliovirus develops post-polio syndrome after 30 to 40 years, and which is characterized by new onset of muscle weakness with progressive deterioration. Remember, we talked about that the weakness usually improves with collateral sprouting. So in this post-polio syndrome, it doesn't mean that the person has got polio once again. It means that as a result of aging process, the axons are basically being destroyed due to this aging process. So the patient's muscles are being weakened as a result of that destruction of neurons due to the aging process, and not due to the recurrence of polio once again. So the differential diagnosis of polio, again GBS, that's Guillain-Barré syndrome. Guillain-Barré syndrome is basically an ascending symmetrical paralysis, in contrast to polio, which is basically flaccid paralysis, and it's asymmetric in nature. Again, it's got sensory involvement as well. Polio is a pure motor problem, and albuminocytological dissociation in the CSF. That is, the proteins are very much elevated in contrast to the lymphose level. So this is one of the problems this is one of the signs of GBS, that we have albuminocytological dissociation. Aseptic meningitis might have symptoms and signs like polio, but it's usually not associated with paralysis, and apart from that, it won't be having positive stool cultures, which we'll be seeing in poliomyelitis. Botulism is basically blurred vision, feeling tired, and followed by weakness of arms, then chest, and then legs. In case of transverse myelitis, you usually have a sensory level, in which you have a particular level in which you have loss of the sensory motor parameters over there. The treatment. In case of abortive, treatment is usually supportive, like analgesics for pain, sedatives in order to reduce the anxiety, irritability of the patient, proper diet, bed rest, and nutritional support. In paralytic poliomyelitis, you need to closely observe the patient for some sort of respiratory insufficiency that might develop due to the involvement of diaphragmatic and intercostal muscles, and close observation of progression of paralysis and immediate respiratory support if needed. Supportive management, again, like analgesics and sedatives. As talked about earlier, that polio also presents with deeper brain involvement, like, so we can have vasomotor changes and fluctuations of BP. So we need to monitor the BP due to vasomotor changes. Again, nutritional support. Patient is paralyzed, you need to provide the patient nutritionally. Minimal handling of the involved limb, and physiotherapy is done after the acute illness is over. Again, there will be some improvement of weakness while you are doing the physiotherapy. So we have got vaccination. The vaccination is something that is basically used to prevent poliovirus, and we have got live attenuated vaccines, that is SAVIN, and kill, that is known as SALC. If patient has had an infection with poliovirus, you still need to vaccinate after the acute illness is over in order to provide protection against the other two serotypes. So the serotype 2 and 3 has been eradicated, and only serotype 1 remains. Pakistan polio eradication program was basically started in 1994 with the aim of eradicating polio virus nationally. So this concludes our discussion of polio virus.